Self-esteem is so much more than blowing a kiss to ourselves in the mirror. Honoring ourselves is the ultimate act of courage. It is the hero's journey, and never more needed than now, as we are facing an evolutionary time period, a time of escalating change and 1,000 life choices. My guest today is Nathaniel Branden, who has dedicated his life to the issue of self-esteem and discovering that it is at the bottom line of all our personal distress. Nathaniel Branden is one of the greatest thinkers of our time. He is a renowned psychotherapist, and he is the director of the Branden Institute for Self-Esteem in Los Angeles, and he is a very prolific author. As a matter of fact, I have his new book with me right now. This is one of many books. This is called The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, and he's also done The Disowned Self, How to Raise Self-Esteem, and we're so happy to have him with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.
Actually, the newest book is this one, Self-Esteem at Work.
Right.
That's okay.
Right.
I wanted to explain the relevance and application of self-esteem principles to the challenges of modern business in an information age.
We definitely need that. What is so significant, Dr. Branden, about this time period, and why is it so dangerous if we don't have self-esteem?
Because there's less and less market for people who earn their living only with physical labor. Today, people are expected to be able to think, learn, manage themselves, be self-directing, be innovative, make a serious contribution to the organization that employs them. Today, your biggest, most important capital asset is what you carry between your ears. And if that's so, if today mind, intelligence is at a premium, then trust in your own mind becomes supremely important, and that's the essence of self-esteem. Trust in your mind, trust in your ability to think, trust in your ability to learn, trust in your ability to cope with the challenges of life.
Yeah, you talk about it as a survival need. I mean,
Well,
it's not food and clothing, but it is.
No,
if we don't...
it is because it has significance for economic adaptation, for adaptiveness in a very, very competitive, very, very learning-oriented age, where once upon a time, you went to school or you learned a trade and then you practiced it for the rest of your life. By the time you were trained, you learned what you needed to know, and that was it. Today, a great deal of what we learn becomes obsolete within a few years. So today, we have to be committed to lifelong learning. That's never happened before in the history of the world.
Right. I mean, America really was founded on the Declaration of Independence and had wonderful moral principles, America. But what happened? We got into sort of a victim mentality.
Well, what we lost appreciation for was great importance of self-responsibility, the importance of realizing that we need to be responsible for our own lives and well-being. We need to acknowledge and understand that we're the author of our choices and actions. And we live in a culture in which people's favorite theme song is "I Couldn't Help It." And unfortunately, a great many intellectual leaders encourage them in this belief, encourage them to find the mileage that can be found from being proclaimed a victim. But the truth of the matter is that most of the time we are far more responsible for our destiny than we are willing to admit or acknowledge. And what I write about, or one of the things I like to write about, is to show the many different ways in which this is true, the many different ways in which how we see ourselves, what we think about ourselves, will show up in our choices, will show up in who we're likely to fall in love with, who we're likely to seek for companions, what kind of goals we'll set for ourselves in life, how we'll raise our children. I don't know, on the negative side, I don't know of any serious psychological problem, omitting biological issues, that is not traceable, at least to some extent, to problems of underdeveloped or weak or wounded self-esteem.
Right. This was your life mission, Dr. Branden.
It became that. I didn't know it at the beginning. I thought once upon a time, well, I'm interested in this subject, so I'll explore it, and I'll write a book on the subject.
Right.
And I wrote such a book called The Psychology of Self-Esteem, and I thought that was the end for me. I'll move on.
Interesting.
I wrote on other subjects, but I found I kept coming back to this one because I kept finding I had new things to say. So in 1994, I wrote The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, which I thought, okay, this is the culmination of everything. I'm now definitely finished with self-esteem. And then I began to think about its ramifications for people's careers, its ramifications for business organizations. So that led me to come back with Self-Esteem at Work. That's a new book, be out later in August.
And you have one about women, too? I mean, because that's a very interesting...
Yeah,
women in every culture, Dr. Branden, have been perceived as second-class citizens, and this has affected their self-esteem.
Oh, yeah.
So are you writing about that, too?
I've written about that. I have a book coming out in November called A Woman's Self-Esteem.
Desperately needed.
I'm sorry?
It's desperately needed.
Yeah, I think it'd be an interesting book because it's very different from what I've written before in one respect. It's 70% stories, very interesting stories of women struggling with problems and how they solved them, how they grew as human beings, how they made their life work better, and how they developed their self-esteem. So that
you have like first-hand knowledge.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that I love telling stories, and I thought it could be useful for women.
Let's talk about self-esteem.
With pleasure.
Let's talk about it. We need the definition. How do you define self-esteem?
Self-esteem is your experience that you're competent to think, to learn, to cope with the basic challenges of life, and second, that you're worthy or deserving of happiness. The second is very, very important because some people grow up, let's say, very mistreated, and they feel, in effect, well, this is my fate, this is my normal. And so they get into very abusive relationships, and their friends may look on and say, well, why do you put up with that? But to them it feels normal, because for them that's their self-concept, to be treated in this way. So it has a lot of survival value to believe that you are worthy and deserving of respect, friendship, love, all of which I'll condense into the word happiness, because that will affect what you define as acceptable or unacceptable in the way that other people treat you, you see.
Let's talk about happiness, though. You mentioned happiness.
Sure.
Okay, how does one be happy? High self-esteem definitely is reflected in how happy you are. You say that in the book. Self-esteem.
Yeah, high self-esteem, if your self-esteem is good, it's the best predictor that you're very likely to be a happy person. It stacks the odds very much in your favor because it affects so many of the ways that you will approach life and handle situations. And by happiness, what do I actually mean? I mean that a profoundly affirmative experience of self and of life, a feeling of yes about myself and about life. That is, for me, the essence of what it means to be happy. And so it's very intimately tied to self-esteem. Now, a problem today is, now that self-esteem has become a hot topic, there's unfortunately quite a lot of foolish things said about self-esteem, which could make it sound very flaky, very Californian in the pejorative sense. But there actually is a very serious need. But what people need to understand is that it has to be earned. You earn it through living consciously, through living self-responsibly, through living with integrity. You don't learn it, as you correctly said at the start of the program, by blowing yourself a kiss in the mirror in the morning and saying, hello, sweetheart.
We do that a lot.
Doesn't do it.
Being in L.A. with all these different meditations and all that, we think we just affirm, sit down, and everything's just going to be great, and it doesn't happen.
Quite so.
That's why I like your work, Dr. Branden, because it's very active-oriented. You talk a lot about the behavior, and
it's for people who take their life seriously and want to take some responsibility for improving the quality of their life.
Okay, so I want to improve my self-esteem. How do I do it?
Well, there are a lot of different things you can do, but the first thing I would look at that aspect of your life that's not working very well. That's a troubled area. So you might begin to ask yourself, well, what would happen, I wonder, if I brought 5% more consciousness to my daily activities at work? Or what would happen if I brought 5% more consciousness to my dealings with my spouse, or with my children, or with my supervisor, or with whoever? Or what would change, I wonder, if I brought 5% more self-responsibility to the way I approach my work, or my marriage, or child rearing, or whatever? What would happen, I wonder, if I operated 5% more purposefully in different key domains of life? See, the 6 pillars of self-esteem refers to these ideas, to 6 basic practices which are the foundation of healthy self-esteem, which are the practice of living consciously, the practice of self-acceptance, the practice of self-responsibility, the practice of self-assertiveness, the practice of living purposefully, and the practice of personal integrity. And a lot of what I write about is what these ideas mean and what it would mean to apply them to a particular area. You see, any important aspect of your life could be a vehicle for psychological or spiritual growth. Depending on how you approach it, you can approach work or marriage or child rearing or whatever and say, all right, what would it mean, let us say, to take these 6 practices and really try to apply them to this domain? What would happen is your life would work better, you'd like the results that your actions produce more, and you certainly would grow as a human being.